join us in honoring Hospice and Palliative Care Month. And the introduction would be to Jessa.
Thank you. Hi, so my name is Bridget. I'm a social worker with JSSA Hospice. A little bit, my background, I've been doing hospice and palliative care in the DMV region for almost 10 years now, both in inpatient, outpatient settings. Been with JSSA about 3 years.
Okay, my name is Maria Kaplan. I'm a nurse liaison from JSSA Hospice. My background, I was ICU nurse and CCU nurse in suburban hospital for 6 years, and I'm 12 years with hospice and palliative care, and I'm more than 9 years with JSSA Hospice. So we're very, and I see many familiar names which I'm working with different hospitals or organizations. And guys, we are so happy you join us today. Thank you.
Absolutely. So I'll go ahead, share my screen, and we can get started. You guys can see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, great. So yes, today's presentation is going to be about the cultural considerations at end of life. We're gonna our two objectives are a little bit broad, but we'll break it down. So kind of one piece is to learn about how culture in general affects clients and families near the end of life, and specifically in hospice as well. And then more specifically, talk about how the cultural considerations of Holocaust survivors impact both the patient themselves and their families. Part of these are helpful in really making sure we're supporting these individuals as a whole person, to ensure their wishes are respected during this last phase of their life. And by embracing each person's unique background, it's more of a meaningful experience to these individuals to really feel like we are directly caring for them individually. Okay. So kind of broadly, I know we're all professionals in this meeting today, but just to get in kind of the mindset of, culture is any particular way of life for any kind of specific demographic or the cross sections of demographics, and it's up to each individual how they may incorporate those into their lives. Many of you might have seen this little graphic about like a cultural iceberg. So there may be many aspects of culture that kind of come to our forefront of our mind when we think of that immediately. Music and language, certainly, food, festivals, holidays. But there's many other aspects of ways that culture both influences us, or overtly or implicitly. We might not even be considering of the ways that these are impacting us. There's material aspects, such as the ones like the art and dancing and architecture, but certainly beliefs, values, customs, and social norms and behaviors are, concepts of how we can approach our own experience, as well as ways of filtering our perspective for other people. So I thought this might be a little helpful. I kind of did a little research about the demographics in our region right now. So Maryland as a whole, and then specifically Montgomery County. So it's getting more and more diverse. We're an extremely diverse area, both in terms of ethnicity, which is becoming, certainly Hispanics, African Americans are really on the more of our demographic than previously. 11% of Maryland adults identify within the queer community. And just recently, I thought this was really amazing that Montgomery County was named as the most religiously diverse county in the United States. So it's really apt, that we are as culturally competent as possible, really taking into consideration all of these aspects. And then only a little bit more than half of people speak English primarily at home. I think second was Spanish, third was like broadly European, French, Russian, and then fourth was broadly like Asian languages, so like Mandarin, Arabic, things like that. And then the average amount of the population across the country, 94% are citizens of the US, and in our county, it's only 86. So it's a really apt information for us to be taking into account with our population.
Okay, so this is just introduction. So cultural assessment at end of life. So every human is like all other humans, some other humans, and no other human. Next slide, please. So we're going now at the end of life cultural assessment. So decision making. This is as a liaison for hospice who's coming to meet the people in a very difficult situations when the end of life is approaching. It's a huge discussion, and it's very important to understand at the very beginning who is decision making in this particular family, and it's so much different in different cultures, like collectivism versus individualism. So for example, in Western culture, we respect independent decision. And with many Americans, I'm encountering that no, mom is 100 years old, but she's still able to make her own decision, and we cannot kind of tell her what to do. Versus in other cultures, let's say from the former Soviet Union people, like I came from, at some point, elderly parents defer the decision-making power to their children. And basically, my parents, when they came to USA, they gave me power to make decisions for them when they were 67 and absolutely capable to do it. So some families prefer, like Mexican families, they prefer to make decisions as a family. And yes, we like advanced directives, and it's very important to have advanced directives. And social workers absolutely do know what it is and how important it is to have. But sometimes many families don't have it. And we have to explain who is the next in kin to make decision if patient is not able to make the decision. Who is included in the decisions and discussions, and is full disclosure acceptable? And for some, like me, for example, who am completely aware about this advanced directives and how important they are, I'm sure you trust me that I am. But in the same time, when it comes to my parents, I kind of like, how you cannot share with me information? I'm the only child, I'm the daughter. I have to know what's going on. So it's really important to understand and not to be upset with different cultural attitude to the decision-making process. So the next.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, Maria made some really amazing points, but also, certainly for some people having their religious, maybe their, rabbi or priest be integrally involved in their decisions at end of life is really important. So for some people, that's their guiding principle, in making those decisions. And, while we always need to like officially talk to someone's power of attorney, it's not uncommon that we have people come on service and say, don't use the hospice word, don't tell mom she's on hospice. And that can sometimes be quite a conversation to make sure that we're both following the law, that if a person has capacity, they know they're on hospice. But we want to do it in a respectful way. And that can oftentimes be making sure we're saying things in language that people understand. So a big aspect of our assessments when someone comes on service is, especially as a social worker, is what is their kind of caregiving situation and how might they accept help, both specifically with caregiving, but also from our team. So how is their family involved in caregiving? Is the expectation that their family or even a specific member, a lot of times it might be an oldest daughter, is expected to care for the individual for showing respect and even feelings of obligation. And that can be kind of something to help them navigate the realities of what that looks like, and trying to uphold their goals if that's the person and their family's goals of having them be the care provider, how we can help them have the information they need in order to do that, the resources they might need to be connected with. Some kind of, as I mentioned, like some individuals dealing with the implications of their culture are pretty uncomfortable hiring caregivers. They can see it as these strangers in their home, and that it really is supposed to be an insular within the family. We take care of each other. And some people kind of navigate how they incorporate that caregiver if they so choose in their life. Some of them, they really become like family to them. They're offering them food. They're talking about, they look at the caregivers' kids together, pictures. And some of them, it's really more of a strict kind of employee role that, this caregiver, I want my own space. Maybe they can sit in the other room, and I don't want my feelings of space invaded. And so that can kind of go back to that individualistic culture. If people are very, very independent, if that's what they've brought up to be self-sufficient and it's very integral to their view of themselves, we want to honor that and try to promote that as much as possible. And kind of going into the setting of care, some people, it's very important to never leave their homes. Others, they are like, my goal is to not be a burden at all to my family. I want to go in a facility and they can just be my daughter instead of having to feel like they're taking time and energy away from their own families. So it's really, again, up to that person how they feel. And so yeah, gender rules are, we always try, if we are bringing, our caregivers from hospice, our home health aide, that's a huge thing we want to ask is, are you comfortable with a male or a female being the one who's providing that personal care? And oftentimes they have a preference. A lot of times it's if a female patient wants a female caregiver or male wants male, but sometimes, males want a female. They don't want another male to see them. And very, personal, intimate settings. So it's important for us to be very respectful of that. And sometimes that can be even, a rule of kind of a law in their religion to not have certain genders be involved in personal tasks. Certainly financial considerations, with and without the cultural lens, but certainly within the cultural lens as well. Maybe it was taboo to speak about death and dying. And so they never had the discussion if it was a child with their parents about, well, did you save money for care? Do you have long-term care insurance? What is your retirement financials? Can you support yourself? Instead of, some families certainly probably have that discussion, and some, it might be just at that moment when that crisis or kind of need arises, they're like, wait, we didn't plan for this. How do we kind of navigate that together? And there's certainly a lot of aspects within this caregiving accepting help of trust or mistrust of the healthcare system. And some of that goes back, historically throughout our healthcare system. There have been, unfortunately, signs of inequity and people accessing healthcare or having their pain or other symptoms be not taken seriously. And so we want to establish that trust as much as possible to have them be accepting of the help that we are able to provide. We want them to be able to access all of our disciplines and in a way that feels comfortable to them.
Yeah, and Bridget, I want to add
Yeah.
from the previous slide about this, like some just examples of culture. For example, again, in our culture where I came from, nursing home, kind of, it's a shame for the family to place elderly mom or dad in the nursing home. And this is kind of such a painful decision to make. And demands sometimes from the family not to do it. Same with the gender roles. It's more traditional gender roles, like a woman is a caregiver, a man is providing at home, and it's also could be like daughter-in-law involved much more in the decision making and care than son, for example. So, and the most, I think, painful thing in the other culture is that in the other culture approach to this is that probably the children already who moved in the Western culture of USA, they already accepting some kind of things and they are ready to follow these cultural standards. And the elderly parents who came from another culture and probably they lived there until 60 years old, 70 years old, 80 years old, and took care of their own parents, they seen it in a different way. And this one family conflict can come, and this is where social worker coming in and probably chaplain as well. Yes, Bridget?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yes.
okay, so next slide, please.
Yeah. So this one is a little bit about, so language, certainly someone's actual language they speak, you know, of course, is kind of first. What language is your primary language? Would you feel more comfortable if we were able to have, you know, a translator or, you know, a language line to be able to converse in your given language? But more about a broader kind of idea of language that we're using. So is a lot, I'll say a lot of times, certain cultures, someone might come in and say, don't use the word, I kind of mentioned the word hospice, but don't use the word death or dying. Don't bring up funeral plans in that first visit. It's extremely almost like offensive sometimes. So it's really assessing what their comfort level is, what words are and aren't okay, allowing them to kind of, if it's within their wish, those ones to bring up those words or to ask, hey, we're seeing these changes. Do you want to know what that means? And sometimes, you know, there's, you know, some research about really helpful ways that it is helpful to use the word dying and death to really be concrete about it, but it's not always culturally appropriate, like I was kind of saying. So is it more appropriate to use metaphors or bring in the chaplain to use a certain passage that can help them connect with what the meaning of the dying process looks like? Yeah, are there taboos of being able to say something like maybe terminal? And if people don't understand what that means. So I think one thing to really think about as well is like education level. So are we considering this person might be within a certain culture and they might not be literate. They might not have had, or certainly in a medical context, if they don't have a background in understanding medical jargon, we should really be considering saying it as plain language as possible.
Yes, and about languages as a language, I published the article, and if you guys, one of you will need for your Russian-speaking patients or their families, I published the article in the Russian-speaking newspaper, in the Russian newspaper here, local one, in Russian about hospice care, like interview. And it's not about language, old kind of language in terms of English versus Russian language. It's about cultural language. And mostly I'm trying not to use death and funeral plans. And we like to talk if something happens with me. We don't say like I will die. To have funeral plans, many people don't have funeral plans because it's impolite to have funeral plans because before it happens. And we don't talk about this too much before death occur. So this is what I mean. This is what it is. So
Yeah,
yeah.
in the same way, like I've heard some families share that their belief system is if you start talking about this person's death, it means it comes about faster. So truly, sometimes this language is incredibly important and how someone is both perceiving our care coming in. You know, we never want to make people believe that our goals are to hasten that end of life. So we want to make sure that we're working within someone's comfort level, within their goals, but making sure they have a good understanding of what the choices are. You know, certainly in some languages, the word hospice doesn't even exist. You know, I don't know what hospice is. And so really making sure we can break it down in their understanding of their language. All right, so yeah, we kind of touched on this a little bit, but people's beliefs about death and dying. So what made they think about the dying process? So you know, I had an Orthodox family recently, and this is not uncommon for me to kind of hear, but that the importance and the priority is really sustaining life in every way possible. And of course, not everyone within any aspect of culture is going to feel the same way about things, but it's you know, something for us to step back and consider, is this their goal? And we're there to honor their goal and what they believe is a good death. You know, for us, it's a lot of times, you know, coming into the end of life space, we want people to have a good death. And what that might mean for us is a quiet, respectful, everyone is tearful and saying they love each other. That might not be appropriate for everybody. Maybe their culture says that you should be celebratory, have wine and dance, and that's the celebration of life. Other people, it's maybe extremely solemn affair. They're not taking a celebratory approach. It's very tragic and sad, and that could be, you know, due to culture or even due to, you know, someone's illness. Maybe they're younger and more rapid progressing, and so both taking into consideration how someone's culture might intersect with their lived experience, but culture can give us a kind of lens to filter that through, and also. You know, there's a lot of research about you know, advanced directives and a MOLST, you know, considering their artificial life-sustaining treatments, and minority groups are much less likely to have a DNR as their choice, even when having the same conversations. And you know, I'm not sure, you know, what maybe the research has said are specific contributing factors, but you know, it's certainly something for us to step back and acknowledge as maybe the discomfort around that conversation, or just as, you know, maybe that's just going to be, we're all going to have to, you know, get on that page. That's their page to be on. Similarly, you know, what are someone's beliefs about the afterlife can play a huge role in how they view their impending death or their mom's death. Do they have beliefs about heaven, being, you know, in a better place, that it's kind of a joyous thing to think about this person being able to access this better, higher place of being reunited with loved ones? That's a pretty common one that you know, we hear people talk about. Mom's gonna go be with dad. She has these, you know, I know I'm gonna go see all of my loved ones who've passed before me, and then I'll see you again, you know, after I die. When you die, we'll meet up in heaven.
Yeah, there is beliefs about pain and symptom management, and they are very, there is different beliefs about this. For example, opioids have such a bad stigma from many years, like addictions, other things, that it's very, I mean, I sometimes feel awkward to explain the family, especially at the beginning of their hospice journey, that, you know, like, yes, we will probably start morphine because your loved one is very short of breath, because morphine is kind of like, or it's opioids, it's addiction, it's somebody will be very sedated, or something like this. So this is a huge educational piece about opioids, about morphine, and sometimes not only for the families and patients, sometimes it's for healthcare providers as well, because they also have their own beliefs. They come in from different cultures, they have different experience, so it's all require a lot of patience and educational things. So there is people with different culture that believe that they have to suffer they have to accept the pain. Probably sometimes it's seen as a punishment for something, or just a way to get to the better life after the death. And so it's also should be kind of assessed and accepted and respected. So many years there was kind of beliefs that people who are stoic with their pain, they kind of deserve more respect, and they heroes and all other things. So people probably would like to look as a not a bother for family or for the healthcare providers and suffer from the pain. There is different pain scales. We love pain 8 for people who don't speak probably English so fluently. There is, or more demented, there is Baker-Wang faces scales. There are different scales which used for children and for people with dementia and people from other cultures. But and it's they are very good tools for us. So, for example, we mentioned that suffering is a meaningful experience for many Catholics, and we have to respect it as well. Some people believe that, and they partially right, when we start to give morphine, especially for people who don't have experience with opioids, they are much more sedated than alert, and probably the patient choose to be in pain, but to be more alert and communicate with the family. As well, sometimes it's happened with the families as well. They don't want the loved one to be sleeping, lethargic. They want to continue to communicate with the patient. Next slide, please.
I just wanted to mention quickly
Sure.
about, sometimes we do see, within a certain culture, maybe their own kind of remedies for certain symptoms. And we want to make sure that we, certainly the medical team needs to know, if people are taking a certain substance, in terms of how our perspective, our plan of care might interact with that. And so, sometimes people are afraid of being judged if they share any, specific way of managing, with, some sort of ritual or supplement or what have you. And so we want to be asking questions like that in a very open way, just to make sure that they understand that we want to give them the kind of care that they want, but we need to know the whole picture in order to give our best recommendations.
Okay, food and fluids, it's a very important. It's everyday questions from all different cultures, including local Western culture. So at the end of life, patients will eat and drink less. This is the law of the nature. This is the way the body tries to keep itself dry and comfortable. So, and absolutely honestly, across all cultures, is probably one of the most common belief that if we feed in someone, if our loved one patient eats and drinks, they will fight with the disease, they will be stronger, they will live longer. So, and family with all love in their heart, trying to use this kind of like, can you please eat this piece of food? You will be feeling better. You will have more strength to fight with the disease. So this is, we have all different food cooked at home, and this is really depends on our culture and how we were raised. But again, all of us across the board, we want our loved one to be fed. And there's different beliefs about artificial nutrition and hydration, and this is also should be investigated. For example, we had Jewish patient in a religious Jewish patient in Hebrew home, and it was a while ago, and he was on intravenous fluids for a long while, although he was absolutely unresponsive. Because for all those months he was unresponsive, because family believed, and this was advice from rabbi, that if somebody not eating and drinking, the life should be kept and patient should be hydrated, and everything should be done in terms of like feeding and hydrating. So we should and we do respect every belief in this case, although we continue explanation, education, and assessment and discussion. Bridget, if you want to add as a social worker, please.
I just wanted to add, like, this conversation came up last week with me again with a patient about, certainly in facilities about making sure they have access to, if they follow any sort of diet, like being kosher or halal, making sure they're able to access that and that we communicate as best as possible with, a dietitian or what have you at the facility to make sure that they're being provided with a diet that's within being respectful of their choices. Is it can be a barrier sometimes to really be able to find that, and so it's important that we all can collaborate really well to meet those needs. We touched on a few of these before, but really kind of specific about religious and spiritual practices, really about like the dying process, is pretty common. So are there any specific prayers that need to be said? If someone's Catholic, they might want to get the sacrament of the sick and really helping people connect, if they need a specific like priest from a Catholic church who could be able to make a visit in person, are we able to help facilitate that? And really, and the fact that a lot of people think of it still as kind of last rites, but it can happen as many times as they want, to have that sacrament of the sick. Sometimes people have it at the hospital and then back at home. It's whenever they feel, they need it. So we want to be respectful and continue to offer that. There's some rituals at the time of death that can be important to some people. There's, I have a patient right now who we have a note on their file that when they die to call their congregation rabbi to make sure they come out and do the ceremonial purification rituals and do the ceremonial washing before that body is moved. And so it's, or to have certain linens for some people, even not specifically to religion, but it's kind of in this vein that for some people it's very important that they're taken from their home in a certain garment, or that they're not touched at all after death. Some, specific cultures that they don't want the body to be touched at all for a certain period of time because their belief is that the spirit needs time to leave the body. And if you disrupt that process, you might be disrupting their kind of ability to move on from this life. So we want to be extremely cognizant of the way that we're coming in and being respectful of this, such a sacred time for many people. It's like in some Muslim families, they might want the person's body to face towards Mecca, to have this kind of full circle end of life in a very meaningful way for them. So to kind of, we're going to wrap up the general assessment area. So it just really reiterating about.
I think, Bridget, I think you skipped clinical skills.
I'm going to talk about it now. So
okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no worries. It's just to really make sure we're talking through like open-ended questions, not making assumptions, even if, okay, I have a Jewish Orthodox family coming in, that means they follow these traditions. It definitely doesn't. Any person could have their own interpretation of what that means or doesn't mean to them. We don't want to make assumptions. And, there's certainly a way to approach our interactions with families, especially that first meeting, to make sure that we're coming in being sensitive, compassionate, showing the humility of their culture, that even if we have some certain ideas, like you tell us what that culture means to you, you tell us what's important to you, and to be curious, to try as much as if they don't want to speak, they don't want to speak about it, of course, but letting them explore that with us can be a really meaningful process to be collaborative about their goals of care and how we can best match that. So we have a little quote from an anthropologist. To be culturally humble means that I'm willing to learn. So we're going to kind of shift gears and talk a little bit more about a specific population that we, kind of have a program for serving.
Okay, so JSSA has the program of serving Holocaust survivors. I think we have around 400 clients right now in the program. This program is sponsored by Germany government, and JSSA does a very good job to help those people who still with us and who went through this hell, the name of which is Holocaust. The Holocaust is the name of the extermination of 11 million people, 6 million of who, I mean, in general, it was 11 million people during the Holocaust, during these times, but 6 million of whom were Jewish during the Nazi era, 1933 to 1945. It was experienced by every Jewish family in Nazi-occupied Europe, which included every country except Sweden and England. And I can add also that Denmark did a very good job to transfer all their Jews to Sweden in one night. They saved lives of their Jewish population. To be fair, they have very small Jewish population, so it was not a big burden, but it's a great thing they did for their Jewish citizens. Next slide, please. So there are 3 stages of Holocaust. First one is one from 1933 to 1939. At this period of time, Jews ousted from civil services. Their stores were boycotted and all their services were prevented from attending public schools, deprived of livelihood. Synagogues were damaged and ruined. Jews were publicly beaten, harassed, embarrassed on the streets, including arrests. And this is until 1939 and mostly in Germany, although in 1938, Austria was captured by Germany and the same process started in Germany. September 1st, 1939 until June 1941, you wonder why are those dates? You probably know that September 1st, 1939 is the official start of the World War II when German troops crossed the border of Poland. And Poland was probably the Jewish population was the major, I mean, not the major population, but it was millions of Jews lived at this time in Poland. So they were all under Holocaust. Many concentration camps for Jews were built in Poland by Nazis. So June 1943, because on June 22nd, 1941, that's when was Soviet Union invasion, when Nazis invaded Soviet Union. And Jewish population of Belarus, Ukraine, and Russia were killed, sent to the concentration camps. I can say that half of my family were killed, including 2-year-old girl. They were at this time in Ukraine. And they were, how it was in the records which we got after the war was Jewish ghetto in this particular town was liquidated by German Nazis, and all people were killed. So 1941, May 1945, it's a final solution phase, which it was liquidation of the ghettos and concentration camps, mass executions in gas chambers, entire Jewish communities which existed almost 2,000 years wiped out. Okay, next slide.
Yeah.
So now we're talking about survivors. Those who survived because of kind heart of some other population who were hiding, who were resisted, who were able to escape every survivor is unique, and each person lived an individual life, including unique experiences and personalities before, during, and after World War II. In the previous slides, I was probably emotional, and I forgot to mention about medical experiments, which is very important for us because we provide medical care. And doing these information sessions in the hospital, I met a man who was in 87, and his twin, also 87 years old, was on his bedside, the twin brothers. They both had numbers on their arms from concentration camp, these tattoo numbers, and they both were under medical experiments as the twins, because as medical professionals know, that twins can react sometimes very close by genetics, and they can react differently to same or differently to different like treatments and experiments. So they both were in Auschwitz and under medical experiment, and they're still around us. They're still like in 80s, those who were children at this time. Next, please. So not all survivors were in concentration camps. Many survived by hiding in the forests or being hidden by non-Jews, later honored as a righteous Gentiles. And in Israel, in Jerusalem, there is an alley of trees which devoted, and each tree is planted in honor of the name of this person who wasn't Jewish, who saved the life of Jewish family, children, or Jewish person. And and to understand how difficult it was, it is like if somebody will report you and that you hide in the Jewish family, you will be killed, including your children. So whole family will be killed, including this Jewish family, which was hiding with you, and including your kids, even they probably didn't even know you're doing this. So these people were really saints and angels, and people who were risking their life in sake of their kind heart, in sake of the life of their neighbors. Some people were and those people, actually, I was taking care of some Jewish old people who were hiding years and years in the attics or in basements or wherever. And now the horrors of chasing them come into their mind in the end of life. They kind of living through these horrors, and it's so important for us to know about their story. Resistance. Some of the Jewish people escaped the ghettos, escaped concentration camps even, and they were in resistance, fighting with Nazis. Some of them were in ghettos, which is it's a small quarter of some town, which was packed by people, and Jewish population were living there, Jewish people were living there, but most of them were liquidated by Nazis before they were leaving their town. Some of them escaped. Some of them were, some survivors were able to leave their ghetto alive, but majority of them were liquidated or killed, killed, put in the concentration camps, yes.
I just wanted to mention, like, kind of in this vein, there was one patient I know we had recently, at some recent point, who was able to falsify papers, to show she wasn't Jewish, and she stayed in her area, but then was recruited to work as like a secretary, in like the Nazi office in her area. So her, a lot of layers in her experience with that. And so there, like Maria said, there's a plethora of different ways that people can experience as a Holocaust survivor.
And some of the children who were hidden by their neighbors, for example, Catholic family, they became Catholic because they were raised by Catholic, but they do know that they were Jewish at the beginning, their life, and their parents were Jewish, and they were born in Jewish family. And this is also like, I encounter these people. I don't know, Bridget, if you did. So it's also interesting mix of wherever you were born, whoever raised you, and self-identification. it's also kind of a big cultural thing to know about the particular patient.
Absolutely. So Maria touched on, a lot of these different experiences, but, overall, all survivors, are alive today through luck and random circumstances, and a lot of times, and they each survived their own horrific experience in different ways. And they kind of have a different perspective on their survival and what it means to them. They've had experiences, probably positive and negatively. Maybe, someone really did reach out and try to shelter them during the war. And, that can change the way that they perceived their experience. But, as an aging survivor, they have to, kind of in a lot of ways accept that they need help from others. And for many, needing and accepting that help may be really difficult, and it can trigger really traumatic memories. So their coping skills might be a little bit different for that. Many survivors managed to cope really well after the war and rebuilt their lives, and really, restarted. They tried to like restart their life with great purpose. Others really weren't able to do that. And as these individuals age, these coping mechanisms and the resiliency, it can actually, sometimes create some barriers for being able to really accept and manage the care that they may really need. Kind of in this vein, all survivors in some capacity, just look at the basic trust you have in humanity and the world was really destroyed. Their whole perspective really can shift your whole life view of how you can perceive yourself, your meaning, your intrinsic having, your intrinsic value. And so providing the care to this population, you have to really be cognizant of the ways that we're allowing people to dictate their own care, and be true to their goals. So yeah, Maria mentioned a little bit that there are a lot of child survivors that we work with now. So today, they're aged 80 to 95. So certainly a lot of those who survived the Holocaust have now passed, but definitely not all of them. A lot of them that were children are still with us. 1.5 million children were murdered during the Holocaust. And the majority who survived were kind of the hidden ones or in orphanages or maybe covenants. They were not usually raised by their own parents. A lot of times their parents were separated from them. A lot of times like families were fully separated until maybe they found their brother. They didn't even know if he was alive or not for decades, and they managed to find each other in Israel or in the States. A lot of times individuals may be told, oh, you were so lucky to have survived. And people have the best intentions with that, but it can kind of feel a bit like it negates their experience and their real the ways that this sticks with them, that they don't feel lucky. There's a lot of survivor's guilt, as you can imagine. Maybe they are being kind of erased their country and language of origin because they fled from their original countries, like Maria said. And a lot of them, because of this stage in their life where they're coming to end of life, it can be a re-experiencing of these childhood traumas that they may not have really accessed before. Certainly if someone has dementia, we see people can really have kind of these flashbacks or re-experiencing and not able to really conceptualize the realities of the difference between then and now. And they're like many didn't have, what you would call a normal childhood development and being able to individuate themselves. So they're not, always having that same perspective on themselves and wondering why they're meant to continue to exist when others didn't. So we work with, the survivors themselves, but a lot of times we work with children of survivors and certainly if we have a survivor on our service, then we're working with their children a lot of times. And so that can hold a great deal of meaning and specific experiences. Of course, everyone is in their own different experience. But, it wasn't just something they learned in school. Oh, World War II and the Holocaust. It was a real influential aspect of their lives. They usually, were told about families that were murdered, and were often too young to understand really what they were experiencing, and it just became part of their whole, identity, their family identity, and their dynamics with their parents, could be, challenging at times. Certain secondary trauma is experienced by a lot of children of survivors. They're kind of having that vicarious trauma, and can have, similar to PTSD kind of symptoms based on that. So, when we might hear that someone's a Holocaust survivor, we want to pause and kind of consider how we do a lot of life review with a lot of our families. Tell me about your childhood. Tell me about this and that. So we want to be able to ask permission. Do you feel comfortable sharing about this? And what are you comfortable sharing with? A lot of times, there's a notion and a kind of understanding within the community. A lot of people feel great pride and meaning in sharing that experience and making sure other people know about it, and having others, it can be very meaningful to be just bearing witness to their experience.
Okay, so things that we have to probably consider and think when we have somebody who we know is a Holocaust survivor, facilities, illness in healthcare, and they placed in the healthcare facilities. It could reawaken the feelings of helplessness and powerlessness, which they probably experienced 80 years ago, but it still could come back. There are caregivers around them, people who dressed sometimes in the medical healthcare uniform, and it could remind me about medical experiments they were under. It's some survivors experience nightmares and flashbacks, and we know about this. I personally saw this trauma, how they have these nightmares and flashbacks. So food, as you can imagine, they were all undernourished. They were dying from starving. And actually, it's not them were particularly in concentration camps, but a lot of people were starving during the World War II. And for example, my grandparents, who were not in concentration camp, but they were at siege of Leningrad, where 1 million people died during the World War II from starving. They were hiding after the war bread under the pillow during the night. I was raised, don't throw out the food. Never ever. So and it was kind of why you don't throw out the food, because we're not hungry during our childhood in the 70s, 1970s, 1980s. It was coming from our grandparents who survived starving, and probably not even once in their life. So social workers, nurses, hospice team is very sensitive to behaviors and should be sensitive about possible hoarding or hiding or protecting food or giving gifts of food. They can offer a little bit food because they respect you and they want to show you how they appreciate your care. Sometimes they're eating very fast. And it's also because they in fears that somebody can take the food from them. And this was exactly their concentration camp experience or Holocaust experience, let's put it this way. So next slide, please.
I just wanted to mention in the same vein about facilities, and especially, especially if someone has dementia and you can't really have a full conversation about it. But the shower rooms can be really a traumatic experience to have to be brought into. So being cognizant if someone is, refusing to take a shower, step back and, okay, is this just because they don't want to shower, or are we really like traumatizing this person by forcing them to go take that shower?
I want also to add, one thing about drama. So probably some of you know that in Israel, they did not perform Wagner, like composer, great German composer Wagner, for many, many, many years, because Nazis used Wagner, his music, and he was actually a big supporter of Hitler in his past. So Nazis used Wagner music in concentration camp for Jews and during the executions. And it was completely forbidden to perform in Israel Wagner for a long while. I'm not sure if it comes back now, but when people discussed, like, should we allow beautiful music to be played or should we forbid this? The idea was, if it can traumatize just one person in this world, listening to this music listening to this music could traumatize just one person. It should be probably not played or performed in the country. So this is like one of the examples, I think, pretty powerful.
Yeah, and I know we're coming up on time. This is kind of our last little topic about the experience of grief and the reality of death for these individuals that, a lot of people, they might have faced the certainty of death before, and the idea that they've kind of were resilient and overcame that is a huge point of pride and intrinsic value. And so the ultimate confrontation with the reality that they are now going to be facing death can be extremely overwhelming and complicated, and for both the survivors and their families to grieve that loss. It's both, for families, it's obviously the loss of this person, but also the loss of a story that has been told through their family, and a huge point of identity and meaning for people, that the magnitude of this loss can be all encompassing, and that their parents really only knew how to live, and living was part of their story. That grappling with like the dying and the death is some of these families can be profoundly anxious with the intensity of being confronted with this topic.
Because they did not witness the death of their uncles, aunts, grandparents, other family members, because they were all killed during the war. So they don't have experience how to deal with the grief. And another thing, I heard it all the time, when you're meeting with the children of Holocaust survivors, they telling you, Mom probably will make it this time because she survived so much. She was always coming back. She survived, so she should survive this as well. So it's very painful experience for us as well, because sometimes people don't survive. So this or that experience. But yes, it's very common experience of children of Holocaust survivors. They survived, so they should survive again.
And we're just ending with a little quote of, one of the most significant facts about humanity may finally be that we all begin with the natural equipment to live 1,000 kinds of life, but end in the end only lived one. So it's really just, obviously for, the Holocaust survivors, but any cultural element that all of us may have, whatever background or walk of life that we come from, is really individual to that person. So being, cognizant to ask the questions, be curious, be humble in our knowledge, and let them kind of direct that care. So now, if I know we're kind of running on time, but I'm happy, and I'm sure Maria as well, to stay and answer any questions if people want.
So thank you, first of all, for listening.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, there's no questions in the chat, but
Okay.
we've asked people to,
Oh, I do have a
Mhm.
question in the chat from 1:39 p.m.
okay,
You can take a look.
who's speaking?
Allison.
I see it. So you want me just to reread the question, Bridget? Would that be easiest for
That'd be
everyone?
great. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the question in the chat is, can you talk about specific examples of what you see in the Charles E. Smith Life communities in reference to stoicism, age, generational patterns within your houses, and how levels of religious observance plays out in the range of cultural considerations you see there? Do you see that religious observance level strictly informs decisions by patients and families, or is there a diversity or of decision-making based more on an individual preference level, or even influenced by other factors? What other factors affect your communications? Who would like to tackle
We
that?
probably need to speak with you after this.
Yeah, I think there's a lot in that, based on what goes on our campus versus what's going on in general. And I don't know that we can talk specifically about people on campus, but probably give you some general information on that, Allison. I think we should wrap it up because it is a little after 2. So, Angelique, do you want to just give a quick update on follow-up email and surveys?
Yeah, sure. But first of all, I just want to thank everyone for attending this discussion. We truly appreciate and value your time. And I would like to thank our guest experts from JSSA Hospice, both Bridget and Maria. They helped us understand how embracing unique cultural backgrounds can make the experience of death and dying more meaningful and peaceful for both the patients and their loved ones. As far as, again, at the beginning, Jenny let everybody know that in order to receive credit for the CE program, that you must make sure that the name that you want on the certificate, you've updated your Zoom name to reflect that. And then also you'll be receiving an email tomorrow with details of the program. Will include the PowerPoint slides, a hospice myth flyer, as well as instructions once again on how to receive your certificate. You'll be emailing Maria Kaplan, our presenter, and her email and all the instructions will be on that email. And then we just wanted to share that we do have some upcoming events. December the 12th at 11 a.m. We've got Keeping Seniors Safe, and we've got Sally Pessin, who's a volunteer with Montgomery County Police Department. And we will be in person at the Ring House Social Hall. We will put some links in the chat, and then also there'll be in the post-event email, you'll be able to see a way to RSVP for that event as well. So if there's no other questions, again, thank you everybody for joining us and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, guys.